Hello, it's Sean McLaughlin, CEO of Airframes Alaska, and we figured we'd give you all an update on the sale of 3 planes that we talked about a month ago. We've taken about 80 phone calls and emails and the like on the planes, and we're happy to report they're all sold. And I figured I'd give you a little rundown on what we've learned from the process and also the future lives of these planes. And then at the end, we'll show you our newest Airframes Cub we're going to be using for engineering research over the next year. So, one of the interesting stats here, aside from the number of people who called, is where they called from. One of our big surprises was how many people called from Florida, but also in the list, a lot of people from Virginia, from Washington State. We had one from Bolivia, plenty from California, Oregon, Utah, and a few from Texas. So those are sort of the big areas that called about the planes. And we had generally mostly males call. We had one artist female call inquiring about the planes. We had people from all different walks of life. We had a lot of retired military pilots that call. We had one pot farmer who called. And we had a lot of family guys who want to fly around and do things on the weekends with young families. And that was sort of the mix of people who called. In terms of the number of calls we got the most number of calls on the orange Cub, the one right behind me, the experimental one. Second most number of calls was on the yellow Cub, and then finally on the certified green Cub, the 4-place green Cub was the third most likely, the third place one. Also, one of the interesting things is how many people called who didn't have their tailwheel endorsement yet, that have looked at what people do with these planes, looked at the lifestyle, looked at the adventures we go on, and aspired to them as opposed to already being there. So a lot of the people who called were going to be tail dragger pilots for the first time, and that was somewhat of a surprise to us, a welcome surprise to us as well, in the number of people who called. And then we had one really cool company that called inquiring about the planes, and it was from another company which we all started calling sort of the Super Cub or Airframes Alaska company of the water, which was a company called Nordic Tug. So we've all started checking out ourselves as well here. So that's a quick rundown on who called. In general, I'm just going to give you a quick update on what happened. This plane here sold for a mild discount to list based on the fact that the customers are paying cash. It's going to Utah. It's going to stay here through the May trade show so we can show it off, and then also just wait for COVID restrictions to die down before we try to take it out of the state. And then this plane's going to go to Utah, and it's 2 families that bought it together, both with children, that are going to use it for adventures in Utah. Moving over to the yellow Cub. This Cub's a really interesting story. We had 4 offers on this plane that fell through before we had our final offer that worked. And I want to give you an idea of some of the few things that happened here, because again, I learned some lessons. Maybe you guys will learn from them too. So when talking to banks on these planes, so first of all, the first 3 buyers were all had financing. We're going to use a bank for financing. And the appraisals, of which I was involved with all of them, all came in right around our number, basically between 142 and 165 on this plane. But some of the finance companies were really held back by the fact that the crash history for this plane. And when I talk about that, I'm not talking about the fact that I flipped it, but back in its previous life, believe it or not, this N number and this serial number plane was actually one of the original 4-place planes way, way back when, which actually was a crash. And it's been in a couple of crashes since then, before we even owned it. Of course, after every one of those crashes, it was rebuilt from scratch. But the banks don't really get that. They see a crash history on a plane, and they were pretty cautious about offering financing. And so some of the banks rescinded the financing or were only willing to do a certain amount of financing on it. The second thing that happened on this plane is that this plane does not have ADS-B on it, in or out. And some of the people that were buying it, first of all, the banks all wanted ADS-B to be installed, and some of the people buying it were going to operate it around Class C airspace. Obviously, there's not much of that here in Alaska, but we're going to operate it in those spaces and needed it. And this thing has a vector transponder in it, not easily connected to an ADS-B system. So it was going to be expensive to put ADS-B in this plane. The person who actually bought it is going to put the ADS-B in regardless, but that held some people back. The third thing that held people back was the thing everybody's talking about, of course, which is COVID, and just the whole idea of a lower 48 buyer trying to get this plane out of Alaska and to the lower 48, given some of the Canadian restrictions right now. really gave some people some pause. Again, this plane's going down after the trade show in May as well, so we're going to give it a couple, we're going to give it a month or so, month and a half or so before they try to take it out of the state. Hopefully things will be a little easier then. The green Cub, which isn't in here anymore, is also sold, and that's an interesting story. That plane is staying in Alaska, and it's going to be used in a real rock'em sock'em guide business. The buyer of that plane, I'm sorry, and this one went at list price. That plane is going for above list, and the reason for that is that plane is back in the shop, and we're putting pistol flaps on it and 35s on it and a few other mods to the panel for that buyer. So that thing's going to basically trade for above our asking price and I'd be surprised at anything less than 600 to 700 hours on it in its first year flying. So that one's getting ready to actually start flying like crazy in May. So that's kind of a quick update. Let me just look at my, some other little great things that came out of it, some questions we got asked quite a bit. I can't tell you how many people called and talked about the price of the plane and said, yeah, I sold my last Cub for $30,000, which gives everybody, I think, in our business a sense for what's happened to Cubs, just over the last 15, 20 years with with all the STCs added and the new, to make them fly in other, experience other parts of flying. The prices have gone up. There's a lot of demand, and some people were, sort of lamenting the fact that they had sold their Cubs when they were a lot less expensive. Also, a lot of talk about experimental versus certified, and all I can say about that, I think this is a well-trodden area, and you guys might know more about it than me, but just for the sense of sharing it, I think people like buying certified Cubs. They have a certain comfort knowing that everything was handled properly and handled, in a top-shelf way for the plane, over its lifetime. But I will tell you this, experimental is growing as well. Some buyers that didn't get a chance to buy our planes are going to be building planes using our parts over the next year. A lot of them turned into contracts to build custom planes, and some of them are going to be experimental. And I think really with experimental, it comes down to who the builder was and how they built it and what parts they used. And so I think in the experimental market, I spent a lot of time talking to people about that whole story. And really, when you're buying experimental aircraft, you're buying a plane, but you're also buying the person who built it. So that's why we feel very comfortable with the people that we work with here at Airframes Alaska to build experimental aircraft. But buyer beware. If it's someone with less resources or trying to do it on a tight budget or from a wrecked Cub or something else that might not be fully vetted, that can be a dangerous way to buy an experimental. All right, so on my notes, I think I hit everything I think people have asked and wanted to hear about. So from there, I'll just show you quickly our newest Cub. And this is going to be our Cub for the next couple of years. It's going to go, actually we should have it flying here within a couple of weeks. Right now, we're just storing it here, waiting for our pistol flaps to come from our factory. We're in the queue just like everybody else, waiting for pistol flaps. So once those are on, we're going to put this thing back on its 35s and get it ready to fly. So this is a 3-place Super Cub. We did a color scheme that everybody's calling gravel bar camo. Not that we're trying to hide or anything, but we thought we'd kind of go with this black with battleship gray accent. And of course, we've put all of our STC products on this plane. I'm going to take you around just to show you the coolest part of it in my mind, which is the 3-place. Watch that, cameraman. So, unlike the 4-place we've been doing a lot of talk about, this one is a pilot right entry only. And it's one person in the front, the pilot in the front, and then 2 in back. Of course, if you were going to fly this tandem, someone could sit in the back in the middle and still fly it with a stick in the middle. But the idea here is to just pop out the frame just enough so that you can get 2 people side by side. And the nice thing about this design is that the pilot in front has pretty much the same experience they've always been used to in a Cub, with center stick, 1 person there. So if you're a longtime Cub pilot and if you like that that aesthetic, or you like that feeling that you've flown with for all this time, you still have that while having a lot more chance to put your baggage and your other details right down the center line of the aircraft. This one also, of course, has a very big baggage door in the back, which I'll show you quickly. So that's our baggage door for the rear of this aircraft. This one right here is just for our ELT mount. And then we left the back open, and this is just a door for just pushing your stuff around inside. So if you put something back really far, oh, this one's really tight. But if you put something back really far, you can just basically go in here and push it back forward so you can get it out. So that's all this door is for. Couple things with this aircraft, you know, 'cause people keep asking these things. This will take a wide body mounting kit belly pod, so that will still fit. So the profile down to the bottom of the aircraft is similar to a wide body Super Cub. As a matter of fact, this whole design is basically a wide body P18 frame, and then splooged out, as you see here with this part here. The other thing though is this aircraft does not have float fittings on it. We're engineering float fittings for us to replace over the next year, but this one we didn't want to wait for that, and there's some pretty complicated geometry and other stuff involved with the float fittings, so this one won't have float fittings. And a pretty simple dash, right? So low profile, simple dash. So we look forward to flying this one. I'm hoping I can actually get it out for Spring Bear and run it through its paces. And oh, this is a 180 horse aircraft as well. And hopefully we'll get the flaps on it in time. If not, we might put the old flaps on it for a bit so we can fly it. All right, so again, Sean McLaughlin from Airframes Alaska, and if you got any comments or anything like that, leave them below or reach out to us and we'd be happy to answer questions. Thank you.